Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chof, Daf 20 of Masechta Hagiga, friends. Daf Chof, friends. We're mamish in the thick of things over here, Tumah and tahara. We're going to talk about people who eat chulin and treat it as kodsha, al-tyrus kodshim, and different types of things getting switched with each other, all sorts of very, very fun stuff. And then we are going to wrap up the second parak of Masechta Hagiga, begin the third parak of Hagiga, and we're going to talk about differences between levels of Tumah and tahara for Truma versus Kodesh. So, very, very exciting stuff. Let's get started. So we're going to get started on Daf Yud Tes Amud Beis, 2 lines from the bottom. You ready? Omer Rav Mori says Rav Mori Shmamino. So we learn from this. From what? I don't know. From our Mishnah. Chulin shenaisu al tyrus hakodesh ki kodesh damu. Shnikes. Friends, who could tell me what that means? Okay, chulin shenaisu al tyrus hakodesh. What in the world? It basically means, right, so we talked about in the Mishnah that you have people, right, Prushin. You have people who are makpid that whenever they eat chulin is just regular food, right? Not truma, not meiser, not anything. Chulin. So somebody who eats chulin, but is makpid that he's always in a state of purity when he eats the chulin. So that's the Prushim, right? The Prushim, they're makpid, they're careful that when they eat chulin, even so, they want to be pure when they eat chulin. Even though you don't have to be, but they're makpid to be. Now, what if you have a fellow who treats chulin in such a pure way that he treats it as though it's kodshim, right? For example, right? If you have meat of a shlomim. So you have meat of a shlom, and so now if that meat becomes, let's say, I don't know, touches epis a dead body, I don't know, and it becomes a rishon l'tumah. I think that's correct. No, it becomes an avatum. Oh gosh, let's not even go that far. Let's say pashit, I don't know, you have a fellow who's tummy for the day. Dead chariot falls on a guy, he's tummy for the day, right? So he becomes a rishon l'tumah. Then he touches some shlomim meat. The shlomim becomes a sheni l'tumah. Now, that shlomim meat, if it touches other shlomim meat, so then that becomes a shlish l'tumah, and then if it touches other shlomim meat, it becomes a revi l'tumah. Now, let's say you have a fellow. Now, if it's truma, if it's chulin, on the other hand, so in general, chulin can only become a maximum of a sheni l'tumah, right? A piece of pizza. So if you have a fellow, he comes in contact with a dead chariot, he becomes a rishon l'tumah. He touches a piece of pizza, so then that pizza becomes a sheni l'tumah. If that pizza touches another piece of pizza, that other pizza does not become a shlishi. It remains a piece of pizza. What do you want me to tell you? Now, if you eat chulin, however, al-tyrus hakodesh, but if you are one of these people who is makpid, that even when he eats pizza, he does it with the same level of sanctity as if it was shlomim meat. So then, if you have the fellow who's a rishon l'tumah, and he touches the piece of pizza, it becomes a sheni l'tumah. And if he treats chulin as though it was kodshim, so then when one piece of pizza touches another piece of pizza, it becomes a shlishi. And when that piece of pizza touches another piece of pizza, that's an interesting word connection. Piece of pizza. So then it becomes a revi. Okay? So that's what it means to eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh, that you treat chulin in the same way that you would treat kodesh. So now, says Rav Mori that if we look at our Mishnah, it implies that chulin shenaisu al tyrus hakodesh, so when you have a fellow who treats pizza as if it was shlomim, so ki kodesh damu, so we actually treat the kodesh, we actually treat this pizza as if it was actually kodesh. Let's go weiter for a second. Mimai, how do we know this? Midelo katani bu maila, from the fact that it doesn't mention a maila. Meaning, if we look back at our Mishnah, what does it say? It says, Big Day Amoritz Midrash Lefrushin, right? That the garments of a Am Haaretz is considered like midrash for people who normally eat their chulin in a state of purity, right? That their garment would be considered tamei for these people. And then Big Day Prushin midrash le'ochle truma, Big Day ochle truma midrash le'kodesh, right? And we say that somebody who normally eats, in a state of tyrus truma, right? So we said that if you have prushin, so then their clothing is midrash for somebody who normally eats al tyrus truma, and somebody who eats truma, his clothing is midrash for somebody who normally eats al tyrus kodesh. But we don't mention anywhere chulin al tyrus kodesh, right? That the garments of a prushin would be midrash for somebody who normally eats his chulin al tyrus hakodesh. It doesn't say that. There's no specific category for somebody who eats chulin al tyrus hakodesh. So therefore, it must be that somebody who eats chulin al tyrus hakodesh is basically treated in the same way as somebody who eats, kodesh itself. At the same level of sanctity that would be for somebody who eats kodshim would be for somebody who eats chulin al tyrus hakodesh. So Vidilma, but then the Gemara says, wait, haidlo katani bu maila to eat damu l'trume hatani truma vidamu l'chulin hatani chulin. The Gemara says, wait, why are we assuming that from the fact that the Mishnah doesn't list the category for people who eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh, that memela means that we treat it like people who eat kodshim itself? Maybe we treat people who eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh as if it was on the level of truma, or as though it was on the level of chulin, and we did list chulin and truma in the Mishnah. So why are we assuming that necessarily that people who eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh, it's like kodesh? Maybe it's like truma, maybe it's like chulin, and we didn't specifically list it because we already listed chulin and truma in the Mishnah. The Tanan, we learn in the Mishnah, chulin shenaisu al tyrus hakodesh, that if you have chulin that is made al tyrus kodesh, right, that you treat it as if it was kodshim, harein kechulin, we treat it like chulin. Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadik Omer says, Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadik harein ketruma, that they like truma. So we see that there are options that chulin that is made al tyrus hakodesh would be like the level of chulin, or like the level of truma. So elam miseifa, so rather we know that chulin that is eaten al tyrus, that is made al tyrus hakodesh, is treated like kodesh from the seifa. Yossi ben Yoezer hoya chosid shebekehuna, that Yossi ben Yoezer was a chosid in the priests. V'hoisa mitpachto midras lekodesh, and his kerchief was considered, had a state of midras, of impurity relative to people who normally eat kodshim atyrus, for people who normally eat kodshim. Yochanan ben Gudgada, and Yochanan ben Gudgada ochel al tyrus hakodesh kol yomov, and Yochanan ben Gudgada would eat al tyrus hakodesh. He would even eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh kol yomov, all of his days. V'asum mitpachto midras lechatos, and his kerchief was considered a state of midras for a korban chatos, for mei chatos, right, the water of the paraduma, lechatos in the kodesh lo. That specifically, right, meaning Yochanan ben Gudgada would eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh, and we're saying that his kerchief was considered midras for mechatos, but not for kodesh, kilu, that it had alma kosavu chulin shenaisu al tyrus kodesh ke kodesh damu. So we see that chulin that is prepared and assumes the status like as if it was kodesh, so it has the status of kodesh, and therefore that's why it says that Yochanan ben Gudgada, who would eat chulin al tyrus hakodesh, his kerchief was considered midras, was considered tamei relative to people who have the purity of mechatos, which is kind of the level above al tyrus hakodesh, and therefore it must be that eating chulin al tyrus hakodesh is the same level of kodshim themselves. Amar Reb Yonasan ben Elazar. So now we have three interesting situations that now come up that we're going to have to analyze to understand them. Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar says, Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, Nofla ma'afarto heimenu. If a friend's sweater, his cloak, falls off, V'amar lachavero, and he says to his friend, so Reuven's cloak falls off, and he says to Shimon, Tanali, give it to me, give it back to me. Vinosnalo, and Shimon gave it to Reuven. Right, so Reuven's sweater fell on the floor. He says to Shimon, Shimon, can you give it to me? So Timeya, we now have to assume that the sweater is Tomei. Rabbi Yonasan ben Amr. Okay, so that's case number one. Reuven's sweater falls on the floor. He asks Shimon to pick it up for him. The sweater is now Tomei. Rabbi Yonasan ben Amr says, Rabbi Yonasan ben Amr, Neschalfa lo kelim shel Shabbos bekelim shel chol. If a person during the week intended to take his weekday clothing, because it was a weekday, but accidentally he took his Shabbos levush, he took his Shabbos clothing. Vilavshan, and he put them on and he went to work. Nitmeu, the Shabbos clothing are now Tomei. Omer Belazar b'Reb Tzadik, it says Belazar b'Reb Tzadik, Maise b'shtei noshim, that there was take a story with two women chaveris that were like that they knew the halachos of Tumah and Tahara. Sheneschalfu lo'en klein bebeis hamerchatz, and their clothing got swapped in the bathhouse. Okay, so Rachel was wearing Leah's clothes, and Leah was wearing Rachel's clothes. Uva ma'aslif near Rabbi Akiva v'Timon, and Rabbi Akiva, the incident came before Rabbi Akiva, and he said that they are Tomei, that the clothing is Tomei. So 3 cases. One is that Reuven's sweater falls off. He asks Shimon to pick it up. The sweater is now Tomei. The second case is that a fellow during the week wears the Shabbos clothing. The Shabbos clothing is now Tomei. The third case is that the 2 women in the bathhouse, their clothing gets swapped. The clothing is now Tomei. Maskifla Raboshaya. So now Raboshaya says, 1 second. So are we basically saying that when things get swapped, they're automatically Tomei? Right, Rachel and Leah at the bathhouse, they accidentally swapped their clothing. So a swap is what makes things Tomei. Elemeata. Hoshit yadu l'sal lito pas chitin, v'also b'yadu pas serib. Hachi nami denitmes. A fellow sticks his hand into a basket, and he means to take wheat bread. And in the end, what did he get? Barley bread. Switcheroo. Hachi nami denitmes. So the barley bread is now Tomei because it was a switcheroo. But if you're going to say, yup, switcheroo equals Tumah. But 1 second, that's not true. A fellow's guarding a barrel, and he assumes, okay, I'm guarding a wine barrel. Guess what? Switcheroo. V'nimtzeis shel shemen. And it turns out that it's a barrel of oil. Tahara milatame. It becomes tahor from being able to be mitame other things. Now the Gemara is going to kind of ask about that for a second, but anyways, okay, so let's assume for now what it means that it's tahor. That's what we want to assume for now. So what do we see? So we see that there was a switcheroo. Initially you thought that the barrel was wine. It turns out that the barrel is oil. Switcheroo. And we're saying that, we want to say that they were saying it's tahor. It's not able to be mitame other things. So the time with the Gemara says 1 second, but Ema Seifa, if we keep reading the Brisa, what does it say? Vasur milechol. But you're not allowed to eat it. But you're not allowed to eat it. So 1 second, it does actually seem like perhaps the switcheroo is making it asur. So when the Gemara says, wait, but Amai, how come? Omer B'Yirmiyah ba'omer shmartia midavar hametama v'lo midavar haposla. That it's saying, he says, look, that he guarded it for something that is able to be mitami, but not for something that's able to be posel. Friends, remember we saw the other day that there's a difference between posel and mitame. Mitame means that it becomes tame and then it can transfer its tumah to something else. So for example, if we look at a shlishi l'tumah, I mean, we even talked about it earlier today with the pizza that was a sheni, but let's talk about a shlishi l'tumah. So shlishi l'tumah in the context of truma is pasul, meaning truma maxes out at a shlishi l'tumah. There's no such thing as a revi l'tumah by truma. So then, when truma becomes a shlishi, it's pasul, meaning it becomes invalid essentially. I guess Tumah, but Tumah implies that it can be Metame other things. By Kodshim, on the other hand, a Shlomim that's a Shlishi, is Tumah is able to be Metame other things. It can make a Revi. So when it comes to a Shlishi by Truma, it's Pasul, because it can't be Metame other Truma. When it comes to a Shlishi by Kodshim, it's Tumah, i.e. it can be Metame other things, to make a Revi by other Kodshim. So now, this fellow was guarding this wine to the extent that he was making sure that nothing would happen to it, that it would be able to be metame other things. But he wasn't necessarily guarding it to make sure that it would not become pasul. Okay, I guess truma as opposed to something that has the status of kodesh, I guess. So therefore we're saying that, so we're saying that it's, right, so we said tahor milatame, what did we say? We said tahor milatame, that it's not going to be metame other things, because the fellow was guarding it to make sure that it wouldn't be metame anything else, right? It wouldn't become tamei to the extent that it could be metame anything else. But asur milechol, he can't eat it because it itself could be pasul, right? Maybe it contracted tumah to make it itself pasul. Okay, fine. So, but what do we see nonetheless? We see that it's not going to be metame other things. That even though there was a switcheroo, even though he initially thought that it was wine, but it turned out that it was oil, that doesn't memele make it tamei, right? We said it's not going to be metame other things. So that's the question, right? Kilu, it sounds like, we had said that a fellow during the week thought he was taking weekday clothes, but in the end it was Shabbos clothes. The Shabbos clothes are tamei, right? Rachel and Leah are in the bathhouse and they switch their clothes. All of a sudden it's tamei. But we have wine that turned out to be oil, and we're not saying automatically it's tamei. It's not metame other things. Now the Gemara digresses for a few lines. We want to say, wait a second, but is that even a thing? Can you guard something to the extent that it won't become tamei l'tamei acherim, but it can become pasul? Is that such a thing where you can guard it for certain things but not for others? In V'atanya, as we learn in the Brisa, certainly you can guard things, compartmentally, to an extent. As we learn in the Brisa, Hoshet Yadu Besal, if a fellow stuck his hand into a basket of figs, V'asal al Tseifo, and the basket was on his shoulder, V'magrefa b'soch asal, and in the basket was epis a shovel. V'hoyeblibu al asal, v'loyeblibu al magrefa, and he was making sure that, and he was making sure that he was going to, that the basket was going to remain tahor, but not necessarily that the shovel was going to become tahor, tamei, or was going to remain tahor, right? Kilu. He was certain to make sure that the basket itself would remain tahor, but not so the shovel. The shovel wouldn't necessarily remain tahor. So hasal tahor, so the basket is tahor, v'magrefa tmei, and the shovel is tamei. Hasal tahor tetamei magrefa l'sal. How can we say that the basket is tahor? Shouldn't the shovel be metame the basket? So ein kli metame kli. So the Gemara says no. One vessel is not able to be metame another vessel. V'litame ma shebisal, but nonetheless, shouldn't the shovel be metame that which is in the basket, i.e. the contents of the basket, the figs? Ravina says, Ravina ba'omer shmartiv midavar shemetamo v'lo midavar aposlo, that, it's talking about a situation where he guarded the shovel from something that would make it tamei, to be tamei other things, i.e. this shovel was, he took care to make sure that the shovel would be unable to be metame the other figs, but he did not guard it to the extent that it would become pasul, i.e. it's possible that the shovel became pasul, so it itself is pasul, but it won't be metame the other figs, but it's certainly not tamei. So we do see that there is a concept of being able to guard something to an extent. Guard something to the extent that it won't become tamei, be metame, other things, but it still itself could become pasul. Okay, fine. So we do see that it's possible to kind of do a partial guarding. But says the Gemara, mikol makom kasha. But still, we have this question of, going back to our initial question of, the switcheroo. Right, we had seen two cases. The case of the fellow during the week who's wearing Shabbos clothes, and the situation of Rachel and Leah in the bathhouse where their clothes get switched. We said the switcheroo seems to be making it tamei. But we see by the wine and the oil that there was a switcheroo. He thought it was wine, turns out it was oil. And we're saying that it's tahor milatame. It's not necessarily going to be metame other things. Says the Gemara, V'od, and more so, Mosiv, Rabba bar Avua. 1 second, we have a kasha from Rabba bar Avua. Maisa b'sha'achas was a story with a certain woman, Shabbosif near Rabbi Shmuel, that she came before Rabbi Shmuel. V'amrlo, Shitaka said to him, Rebbe, Beged ze aragtiv, I weaved a certain garment, b'tayre. I weaved this garment, and I was pure when I weaved it. But I didn't necessarily have intention that I was going to guard it in a pure state. So, I'm telling you, when I weaved this garment, I was pure, right? Everything was pure. But lemaisa, I didn't necessarily have intention to make sure that I was going to guard it in a state of purity. When we talked b'dikas shaya, Rabbi Shmuel bodka, and then Rabbi Shmuel was like, wait a second, there's something fishy over here. She's saying it's tahara, but she's not necessarily guarding it. So he asked a few questions, probed a little deeper. Amrlo, and she said to him, you know what, Rebbe, nida mashcha imi bachevel, that when I was weaving the garment, there was a woman who was a nida, and she helped fix the threads on the loom. And therefore, actually, we do have to be concerned about midras of anida, and maybe actually it is tamei. Amr Rabbi Shmuel, says Rabbi Shmuel, Kama gedolim divrei chachamim, how givaldig are the words of the rabbis, Shayu Omrim, that they said, Belibo l'shomo tahor, that if it's in a person's heart to guard it, so then it is tahor. Ein belibo l'shomo tamei, if it is not in his heart to guard it, so then it is tamei. As we saw in this story, that it wasn't in her heart to guard it, and it turned out to be tamei. There was another incident with a woman who came before Rabbi Shmuel. Amrlo, she said to him, Rebbe, mapazo aragtia b'tayra. This cloth, I weaved it in purity. But I wasn't necessarily intending to guard it in a state of purity. We talked b'dikas shaya Rabbi Shmuel bodka, and Rabbi Shmuel probed deeper and asked kashas. And it turned out, Amrlo, she said to him, Rebbe, nimanifsukali, that when I was preparing, before I actually weaved the garment, but while I was preparing the materials for the garment, there was a thread that snapped, b'kshartia b'peh, and I tied it using my mouth, and I was a nida at the time, and the rok of a nida, the spit of a nida, is I believe is an avatuma, and therefore, so even though, yes, when I made this garment, I prepared it in tahara, but I guess at the time that I was preparing, before I made it, I tied it using my mouth, and I was a nida, and therefore there may still have been some spit on it, and maybe then so it's taka not tahor. Amr Bishmo, says Bishmo, Kamagdolim Divrei Chacham, how great are the words of the rabbis, that they said, Belibo l'shomo tahor, that if it's a fellow has intention to guard it in purity, so it's pure, ein belibo l'shomo tamei, but if it is not in a fellow's heart to guard it, so then it is tamei. So if that's the case, so then who cares if there was a switcheroo? Who cares if there was a switcheroo? Who cares if the guy during the week took his Shabbos clothing by accident? If his intention was to guard it in a tahor way, so then that's right. That seems to be the case, right? Belibo l'shomo tahor. Said if it's in his heart to guard it, it should be tahor. So who cares if there's a switcheroo? So the Gemara says, B'shlomo Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadik. I understand according to Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadik. What did Rabbi Elazar bar Tzadik say? That was with Rachel and Leah, that their clothing got switched. So kol achas v'achas omeres chaverosi eishes ha'ma'aretz. Rachel thinks that Leah is the wife of an Amoritz. Leah thinks that Rachel is the wife of an Amoritz. They both just assume like, oh shucks. Rachel says, oh shucks, I got Leah's garments and she's the wife of an Amoritz, it's for sure tamei. Leah says the same thing about Rachel. Shucks, I got Rachel's clothing. She's the wife of an Amoritz. I'm sure, right, certainly these clothes are tamei. And they both basically let down their guard because they just assume that the other one is the wife of an Amoritz. And therefore they assume that it is not tahor. Friends, excuse me, my mother's calling. Okay, apparently dinner is at 7:40 as opposed to 7:30. Alright, what do you want me to tell you? I don't usually eat dinner. Well, I definitely don't sit down and eat dinner, that's for sure. Why the heck would I do that? Alright, let's go weiter. But anyways, look, my mom's here. She's like leaving back to America tonight. So I made a special exception. I'm going to eat dinner. I'm such a tzaddik, right? Yeah. Think again. Friends, let's go weiter. Where are we? Almost Chadaita Mina. Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram. So now, according to Rabbi Yonasan ben Amram, who had the case of the weekday in the Shabbos clothing, Nami came the Kelim the Shabbos Ovidu Shimer Tvei. That since when it comes to Shabbos clothing, he guards them more. So Masach Daite Minayu. So therefore, when it turns out, oh shucks, it's the right meaning. Then when it comes to Shabbos clothing, he guards it much better. So when he realizes during the week, like, oh shucks, I'm like out running around and doing my job and stuff, and I got my Shabbos clothing, forget it. All this guarding, just forget it. It's done, and he just lets down his guard. So I understand why in those cases it would be tummy. El Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar. According to Rabbi Yonasan ben Elazar, who's talking about when Reuven says to Shimon, "Hey Shimon, my cloak fell on the floor. Can you pick it up for me?" So Naivedlu Shimer biyad dechaver. No, Reuven is looking at Shimon. I mean, he sees what Shimon's doing. He's saying, "Can you pick it up for me?" What's he doing already? You can tell that he's keeping it tahara. So what's the problem? Amr Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan chazaka inot mishamim asher biyad chaveru. That says, Rabbi Yochanan, that we have a chazaka, that we assume that a person is not guarding something that is in the possession of something else, and therefore when Reuven asks Shimon to pick up his cloak for him, it's in Shimon's hands, and he's not guarding it, and that's that, and that's why it's tummy. Vilo, is that really true, that we don't guard something that's in somebody else's hands? But we learn in the Bryce, a fellow, he's got donkey drivers, he's got workers, Tu'un and Tyrus, and they were holding Tyrus, alright? And we're saying that even though they separated from one another, and there's a separation of a mill between the fellow and his workers, Tyros of Tahoris, nonetheless, the Tyrus remain tahor. We don't say that even though the donkey drivers and the workers have the tyrus, we don't say, well, okay, they're in somebody else's hands, therefore they're tummy. We don't say that. And if he says to them, Lichu va'ani ovay achreichem, and if he says to them, you guys go ahead, I'll come later, kevan shenisamu ein of mei and tyros of tmeis. So then, once they're out of sight, then they become tummy. So ma'ishna reisho ma'ishna seifa. And if we say that when you have things in somebody else's possessions, you're not paying attention to them, well then how come in the Reisha we say that it remains tahor? That, right, what do we say? That you have a fellow with his donkey drivers and his workers, and they have tyrus, and even though there's more than a mill of separation, we say it's tahor. If we say though that when you have it, that you're not guarding something that's in your friend's hands, so then, shouldn't it become tummy? So Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, Reisha b'mitar chamor ufayalav l'chach. So says Rabbi Yitzchak Nafcha, well the Reisha, when we say that it's tahor, it's talking about that his donkey drivers and his workers went to the mikveh. So therefore he didn't have to worry. If that's the case, Seifa Nami. So, but then then when he says that you guys go ahead and I'll catch up later, so shouldn't that also be tahor if they already went to the mikveh? Ein am aretz makbid al magaf chaveru. To which the Gemara says, well, technically, sure, but the Amoritz is not, and we're assuming, I guess, that the donkey drivers and the workers are Amoritz, that they're not, don't know the halachis, they don't care about the halachis, and therefore, while they may have gone to the mikveh, there other people that they might be interacting with didn't, and it might become Tamei Yohachi, Reishanami. So, if so, then the Reisha as well. In the first part, when they're, separated by a mill, shouldn't we be concerned that even though they went to the mikvah, maybe their friends might be interacting with the tyrus? So, b'baloim derech akalason, akalton. So the Gemara says, well, the Reisha is talking about where he snuck up on them in a diagonal kind of way, and he can always sneak up on them, so therefore, we don't have to be concerned about, but they're always concerned that maybe he's going to come now, so therefore they're not going to make anything tamei. Yachi seifa nami. If so, then also in the second part, right, when he says go ahead and I'll catch up, can't he just catch up in like a shortcut kind of way, and therefore they'll be sure to keep it tahor. So to which the Gemara says, well, since he's saying to them, you guys go ahead and I'm going to catch up to you later, so then it's pretty clear that he's not going to be sneaking up on them immediately, and therefore they might end up, sending it over to their friends, and their friends can interact with it and it becomes tummy. But in general, we have this principle that a person is not going to be careful when something is in somebody else's hands. Okay, and that explains why, essentially, really, in all of these cases, right? Why, when Reuven's sweater falls on the floor and Shimon picks it up, it's tummy because it's in somebody else's hands. Also, when Rachel and Leah get swapped, also you could say that it's in somebody else's hands. Although I guess when it comes to the clothing of the weekday and Shabbos, I guess that's probably because you're gonna let down your guard. Alright, fine, very interesting. Alright, so very nice. So we just finished the second parak of Masechta Hagiga, and just moving on to the third parak. Chomer ba kodesh mi betruma. So kodesh is more stringent than truma. Okay, kodesh like a shlamim, right? A korban meat is more stringent than truma. Shematbilin kelim besoch kelim letruma avalo lekodesh. Okay, interestingly, apparently when it comes to truma, if you need to purify two vessels for truma, so you could put one inside of the other and put them in the mikvah. I guess that works, but not by kachim. If you need to make them pure for kachim, you can't do that. Apparently, I think the Gemara is going to explain how, but there are certain vessels that there's like different parts of them, right? There's the outside of it, the inside of it, and this beis hatzvita, which I think the Gemara is going to explain what it is. We don't necessarily know what it is, but each one is like a different part of the vessel, and they can be treated independently. That one part of the vessel could become tameh while the rest of it remains tahor, but that's only in the context of truma v'lo b'kodesh. But by kodesh, all of the entire vessel would become tameh. Whereas by truma, parts of it can become tameh, but the rest, the other parts remain tahor. Hanose es hamidros, nose es hatruma, avalo es hakodesh. If a fellow carries a midras, so for example, what's a midras? So for example, if you have a zav, and the zav is an avatuma, and he walks in shoes, and he's standing on the shoes, he's putting his weight on the shoes, standing in the shoes, so the shoes become an avatuma as well. So we say that if you carry these shoes, so no tziyas truma, you could also carry truma in a vessel, right? So meaning if you have truma, let's say in like a klicheres, in an earthenware vessel. So if you touch the outside of an earthenware vessel, it remains tahor, because an earthenware vessel can only become tummy from the inside. So if you have a fellow who's an avatuma because he was carrying a shoe of a zav, and we're saying that now he touches, so when it comes to truma, if you have truma in an earthenware vessel, you could still carry the vessel, but not for kodshim. If you have kodshim in that earthenware vessel, you wouldn't be able to carry it. Okay, fine. Big day ochle truma midras lekodesh, the clothing of people who eat truma, right, and are pure in the context of truma, are impure in the context, right, for people who eat kodshim and need to have the purity of kodshim. Lo midas akodesh midas truma, and the measure by kodesh is not like the measure by truma. Sheba kodesh matir uminagev umatbil, that when you put something into a mikvah for kodesh, you have to untie it and you have to dry it first, and then you put it into the mikvah. V'achar kach kosher, and then afterwards you retie it, or you could, afterwards you tie it. U'v'truma kosher v'achar kach matbil, whereas by truma you could tie it up first and before putting it into the mikvah. Kelim anigmarim b'tayra tzrichin tvila lekodesh avalo letruma. If you are constructing a vessel and you make sure to keep it tahor, so then that's fine. It doesn't have to go into the mikvah in the context of truma, but if you're going to need it for the context of kodesh, it would have to go to the mikvah. Hakli matzayif masha besocho lekodesh avalo letruma. If you have a vessel, let's say you have a vessel, before we were talking about a vessel that had figs in it, so let's say you have a vessel that has figs in it, and then you have let's say, I don't know, a fellow is a rishon l'tumah and he touches the figs in the vessel. So when it comes to truma, so just the fig that he touches, if he's a rishon l'tumah, so the fig that he touches would be a sheni l'tumah. Then it would touch another one to make it a shlishi, and it would stop there. But when it comes to kodesh, so then all of it would become all if you have a bunch of figs in a vessel, and in the context of kodesh, if you touch one of the figs in the vessel, so then everything in the vessel would become tameh. Haravi kodesh pasol, somebody who's a revi when it comes to kodshim, so then it's pasol v'ashlishi b'truma. So by shlishi b'truma, again, as we said a few times today, that when it comes to truma, so once it gets to a shlishi, so it kind of stops there, it doesn't make a revi. When it comes to kodshim, so when it gets to a shlishi, it can make one more layer to make it a revi, but then it stops there after a revi. By truma, if one of his hands becomes tamei, so the other one remains tahor nonetheless. Whereas by kodesh, even if one hand becomes tamei, you have to put both of them in the mikvah. Because one hand is tamei the other hand when it comes to kodshim, but not by truma. Ochlin neguvim. If you have foods that are dry, right? I think we talked about yesterday the concept of kiyuton, right? Kiyuton, that in order for something to be able to contract tumah, it has to come in contact with water at some point. So if you have food that never came in contact with water, then it cannot contract tumah. However, we're saying that when it comes to truma, so if you have dry foods that never came in contact with water and your hands are tameh, but it's okay because the foods won't contract the tumah anyways. Avalo b'kodesh, but we don't do that by kodesh. Ha'onen mechusar kippurim. When it comes to an onen or somebody who's mechusar kippurim tzrichin tefillah l'kodesh v'alo l'truma, that you have to go to the mikvah if you want to consume kodesh but not for truma. Meaning, an onen is somebody, right, of course, as we know already from Masechta Brachos, somebody who a relative passes away, and it's I think there's different ways of understanding. Either it's before the person has been buried, or the first night of the from when the fellow was passed away. Anyways, so until the first night, right? So that's a status. So the tumah of an onen, the status of tumah of an onen, as well as a mechusar kippurim, right? A fellow, let's say, if you have a zav, so then on day 7, he goes to the mikvah, he becomes a teful yom until the end of the day. Once the end of the day, midoraisa, he could already eat truma. However, in the context of kodesh, we say that mechusar kippurim, somebody who has not yet offered his korbanos on day 8, while he can have truma, he can't yet have kodesh. Friends, that was daf chof of Masechta Hagiga. We learned some pretty technical stuff on this daf. We learned about the context of, how do we treat chulin that you treat with the severity of, if you have a fellow who treats chulin with the severity of kodshim, is it treated like kodshim? Is it treated like, right, we saw opinions that maybe it's like chulin, maybe it's like truma. We said ultimately from our Mishnah that there's an opinion that you can treat it like, right, we saw from Yochanan ben Gudgada that he would eat his chulin, with the same level of stringency as if it was kodesh, and we see that had the status of kodshim itself, that nonetheless his midrash would be tameh for mechatas, but tahara for everything else. We then got to these different situations, right? When Reuven's sweater falls on the floor and Shimon picks it up for him, or a fellow whose Shabbos clothing gets mixed up with his weekday clothing, or when his Rachel and Leah's clothing in the bathhouse gets mixed together. So we said that basically a person does not pay such attention to when something is in somebody else's possession, and that's why we have to assume that it becomes tameh. Then we finished the second parak of Masechta Hagiga. We started the third parak and started listing all sorts of differences and all sorts of ways how kodesh is more stringent than truma. Friends, that was Avchof of Masechta Hagiga. I hope you enjoyed. Peace out.